Lee Corso is one of the most prominent figures in college football, and he's a guy that everybody pretty much knows. His infectious personality is something that we've followed for years. And today I wanted to take a look at his career in college, not looking at his broadcasting career, but purely his days as a player and as a coach. I think when you're going across generations, it's kind of hard to know all of the names that were so good or had such good seasons unless you were in that era, you grew up in that era and understood that. And Lee Corso as a player was very unique. Goes to Florida State as a quarterback, and he played literally everywhere. And we'll look at the stats here, and it tells you a story of a guy who embodied doing whatever the team needed. And in a way, he was Travis Hunter before Travis Hunter. He was Charles Woodson before Charles Woodson. These guys that were playing both ways. This was kind of a thing back when Corso played. And you didn't see it right away in terms of him being a very much a star contributor for Florida State, but in 1953 comes in as a freshman, and this is a team that had 9 guys rush for over 100 yards that year. He was a solid rusher for them. 207 yards on the ground. He also threw 142 yards. So he did a little bit of everything for that offense, and primarily used as a running quarterback, as a rusher, but still pretty solid season for, again, 1953 standards. I think when you're looking nowadays, you probably think that's maybe not that great, but going back to, you look at his career numbers, that was something. Didn't make an impact on defense in 1953. Had 3 interceptions, which, if you think 3 interceptions nowadays, that's really good. But back when they didn't throw the football, that's also impressive. And he was also really good as a returner. Had 136 yards as a punt returner and scored a touchdown, and his lone return touchdown of his career. So again, a Swiss Army knife, if you will. Did a little bit of everything for Florida State. Now the Noles finished 5-5 that year, but still a very intriguing player nonetheless. 1954, his role kind of changed. It looked very different. He did not complete any passes. He only attempted one, and he was utilized more as a rusher and a receiver. He ran for 273 yards and 3 touchdowns, caught 20 passes for 240 yards and 3 touchdowns. Basically the air raid of the 1950s, if you will. Very interesting. You just don't see that. And then it just continues. In 1955, he kind of does the same thing. 1956, it changes. But in 1954, a huge year defensively. So not only was he a contributor on offense, but he had 6 interceptions last year. He also contributed as a returner. Once again, didn't return any for a touchdown, but he had pretty good average for his kick returns. That year, Florida State finished 8-4. And that was a really exciting year for Corso in his role. 1955, again, more utilized as that runner receiver. He only threw 2 passes this time. One did go for a touchdown. So they still utilized him. And it's really interesting. If you think nowadays, a guy you recruit as a quarterback comes in and really, he only throws for barely 100, less than 150 yards and 1 touchdown, you're probably thinking that you're going to move on from him. But not Florida State. Florida State decided that they are going to still give it a shot. In 1955, they still let him throw a couple passes, but had a big year as a runner, 431 yards, 3 touchdowns, also caught 13 passes for 123 yards. So again, this is a guy who will do anything for his team. And I think we've seen Corso do that across his career as a player, as a coach, as a broadcaster. He has done a lot of things that make it all about his team. And he does whatever his team needs to be successful. Now, Florida State goes 5-5 once again, so they take a little bit of a step back. But still, I think at the time this would have been a very intriguing storyline to follow if social media was around, if we covered college football back then like we do now. Lee Corso might have been one of the more intriguing players. Don't necessarily know if he was going to be one of the best, but still one of the more intriguing players that we saw in college football, and would have been really fun had the media coverage been different. Then you go to his final season in 1956, his best season of his career. Again, at this point, you haven't really utilized him as a quarterback. This year they do. Threw for 369 yards and completed 32 of his 59 passes, 58.8%, which again, nowadays might not be impressive, but not bad back then, especially when you're only throwing 60 passes. Threw 5 touchdowns, also threw 5 interceptions, but in a way that kind of embodies Lee Corso, if you will. When you look at what he did, he was not afraid to try something. He was not afraid to take chances. And you've seen that in some of the things he said on national television. That clearly was who he was as a player as well. Ran for 356 yards and 3 more scores. He also still caught 3 passes for 46 yards. So I'd be very intrigued to go back and watch the film of what they did to utilize his talents. So he has his best year offensively. He technically has his worst year defensively, if you will, in terms of interceptions. But still, a multi-interception year for Lee Corso. 2 interceptions to give him 14 in his career and set a school record for interceptions in a career. Again, contributed as a returner. Can you imagine nowadays your quarterback being a kick returner and or a punt returner? Unheard of. It's just wildly different times. He was an honorable mention All-American that year. Florida State finished 5-4-1, so not the most successful career in terms of team wins, but still a very intriguing career. And Lee Corso is a very intriguing person, and his career pretty much embodies who he is. And then you look at what he did as a coach as well, and it was kind of a roller coaster, but also very fun to watch. Now, as a coach, you've seen it on the broadcast. There are a number of tributes that we've seen to Lee Corso. A number of his players have come on the set and spoke volumes about him as their coach, what they've taught him, or what he's taught them, what they've learned from him. And again, if you look at his total coaching record, it's not going to be super impressive, but when you look at what he did to get to that point, you take away some of those really bad years, which is part of the process, it's actually a decent record. I mean, his first 3 years at Indiana, he went 2-9, 1-10, 2-8-1, and then 5-6 before he had his first non-losing season. And sometimes that's just what it takes. And very impressive to start at Louisville, though. 1969 goes 5-4-1, and then 1970 he makes the Pasadena Bowl, which they tie, which is hilarious. Can you imagine nowadays? Just so many different things. Tying in games. 8-3-1 that year. And then his last 2 seasons with Louisville, he goes 6-3-1. And then the kicker is that his final year, they go 9-1. And he goes off, obviously, to Indiana. And he takes a new job, takes on a new challenge, which I think nowadays would be so interesting. But they don't play in a bowl game, which I thought was very intriguing. A team that was 17th in the country doesn't make a bowl game. Just so different nowadays. Again, that's just how a sign of the times. Then he goes to Indiana, obviously does a lot of searching for how to improve the program right off the bat. Finishes with a record of 41-68-2, including the Holiday Bowl win in 1979. Does end up coaching at Indiana for a few more years. Takes a year off in 1983 before going to Northern Illinois in 1984. And that's essentially where his college coaching career ends. He ends up going to the USFL. That gets discontinued, and then a couple years later, he ends up at ESPN. We all know how that turned out. He also had time before he was a head coach. He started as a GA at Navy, became the quarterback coach at Maryland, comes back to Navy. So he's had a storied career as a player, as a coach, and I think the one thing that we've realized with Lee Corso is that he was entertaining. He was, even if you don't watch him, you learn from when you watch him on ESPN, the entertainment he brings, the entertainment that he's brought over the years was the same way as a coach. He's very successful. He has a personality that people gravitate towards, and he cares about his people. He cares about his teammates. And it was very evident with how he played the game, how he coached the game. And this was really fun. Putting this together, I didn't know a ton about Lee Corso and his career. And obviously, we could have gone into greater depth than this, but I learned quite a bit just from doing this research, just from putting this together. And it makes you appreciate the guy that breaks down the game that we love and makes it even more intriguing about where he came from and how he got to where he ended up.